Buongiorno. È con estremo piacere che sono qui a Milano e grazie Franco per avermi invitato. Questa mattina voglio condividere con voi alcune delle azioni che ho imparato durante la mia esperienza professionale. Purtroppo, però non parlo l'italiano, quindi dovrei continuare in inglese. Comunque cerco di imparare italiano, così che la prossima voglio fare il mio discorso nella vostra bellissima lingua. Ladies and gentlemen, we're all here today to learn something new, me included, so let's do this together. Being a leader today is very difficult. As Maria was saying, it's all change, particularly as you try to navigate through an ocean of uncertainty. So hopefully during the morning we will all see some different insights. I think I was struck by the quotation from Lombardini about a forest of insights, and where better to see this in this beautiful setting this morning. But I guess let's just set the scene for a moment, for a couple of minutes, and let's now see whether it works. It does. I've had the good fortune over my career to work with two of the world's biggest brands, most notably the BBC. Disney might have an argument about that. Every week, 426 million people watch the BBC internationally across 200 countries, and if you're a traveller, there's nearly 1.8 million bedrooms with BBC services within them. Back in the UK, my adopted home, because I'm not English, I'm a Paddy, so there's a lot of synergy between us Italians and the Irish. There's 8 digital television channels, 10 radio stations and 40 local. The BBC employs today 20,000 people and has a revenue of about €5 billion every year. But the most important thing is they've lived with 3 principles for the last 100 years: to inform, to educate, and to entertain. So over the next 12 minutes and 42 seconds, I hope to achieve that ambition. So let's just talk about the journey of the BBC. As with most broadcasters, I'm sure Rai here in Italy is exactly the same. Over the last 19 years, broadcasters, as with all business, have had to cope with this thing called digital, moving from analog to digital. And as Maria was saying, it's really a response to how we as people respond to this capability of technology. And it's really interesting and challenging because, as with large institutions, which is very British, very smart, and at a huge scale, how do you change? And there was a lot of resistance to change. But the organization had no option. And it's interesting in that the organization were pioneers in lots of things: color television, Dolby Stereo, and most recently the iPlayer, this download system for watching programs anytime. So the old concept of broadcasting to a schedule went out of the window, and because people wanted to watch things anytime, any place, anywhere. And then the competition. For those of you who are business leaders, who's your competition? How can you deliver competitive advantage? And the BBC had faced up to the fact that it wasn't Channel 4, it wasn't Sky anymore. Sky were the big enemy. But in 2008-9, they recognized Google, YouTube, Microsoft, Netflix, HBO. So the game changed completely. And that's where I had an opportunity to learn all about not real estate, but about transformational change. Because at the back at the end of the last century, for those of us who've been around a lot, that sounds like a long time ago. The BBC had 500 buildings in the United Kingdom. Only 2% of them were fit for purpose. They hadn't spent any money for over 30 years on any of their buildings. And for those of you interested in technology, buildings only survive if they can carry lots and lots of cables to run the technology. So it seemed crazy at the time that the organization had all its buildings, included its major broadcasting buildings, which were not fit for purpose. So they started this enormous project called the 2020 Vision, basically to upgrade the estate. And that's where I was brought in from Disney to run all of that. And it had 5 simple principles. These buildings had to be audience-facing, they had to be flexible, they had to be cost-effective, they had to be fit for technology. And last but not least, They had to be capable of attracting and retaining talent. But then, when I arrived in 2004, I found I had a new boss, Mark Thompson, who's very British term, the Director General. I'm sure there are some Italian equivalents here, but the CEO. And he said, if we're spending all this money on new buildings, maybe we should also face up to using these buildings as catalysts for change. And these are just 3 examples of over 20 that we did in 12 years, changed the entire estate. And they're just really interesting for 3 things. This is it was opened in 2007, Pacific Quay, Scotland. It was a very expensive building for its time, but it was the first time the BBC could have an all-digital production. There were no tapes. Because for those of you who know something about broadcasting, it's all about content, and traditionally this content was stored in tapes. And that's why you had to design tape rooms, etc., etc., etc. That disappeared there. But also, it was the first time I learned about this thing called OPEX, and where real estate and accommodation costs fit into the overall picture of how an operation, an enterprise runs. It has revenues and it has costs. And the OPEX for this one reduced by 30% because it was the people and the technology costs through greater efficiency made capable by a modern building. But also, more importantly as well, is that this one saw a lot more audiences, people coming into the building to watch shows and to visit the organisation. Because the BBC, I'm not sure how RAI is structured here, but the BBC is a public organisation. It's owned by the public. It's paid for by a licence fee, but which effectively it's a tax. So that was one real insight for me. On the other side, Broadcasting House. I come from a very small village in Ireland of less than 100 people. I never dreamed in my wildest dreams that one day I'd be responsible for spending £1 billion. And I did, and was accountable for it. And Broadcasting House, the BBC received a lot of criticism for it because it costs so much, and why couldn't you go out to the suburbs and spend something cheaper? Most people missed the point. It wasn't about the cost of the building, it was about enabling the organisation to educate, entertain, and inform, and to put people together. Like a simple things. I'm always embarrassed when I've come here and all of you then switch speaking to English because I'm the only non-Italian speaker. Why is that? There, for the first time ever, all of the English-speaking news services and all of the 40 global news services are in the same building. So journalists can understand that it's not just English that's spoken around the world. So they get a better depth and a better quality of journalism. So that's what this whole news multi-platform thing was. And then last but not least, once again, another dream that I never thought I'd have, of helping create a brand new city. Classic bit of regeneration like you've experienced here in Milano Fiore. This was a vacant piece of dockland for 40 years. It's now a city. And it was made possible by the BBC and other broadcasters doing something very different, sharing studios. 2,500 BBC staff, 30,000 new jobs. That's what public service is all about. So at the end of the day, all of this resulted in a 40% reduction of the entire estate, but the remaining 60% was all refreshed. We spent £2 billion, we moved 12,000 people, and it was a very, very busy time. It was all about change. I spent more time with the board of the BBC, with the external auditors, the National Audit Office and the government explaining all of this stuff. But it was all down to one thing, not cost, but change. And let me explain what all that means. You see, I used to have tunnel vision. I'm just going to stand over here and look at this now. I hope tunnel vision translates into Italian, how we see things. Because I describe myself as a lapsed chartered surveyor. I'm a fellow of the Royal Institution of British Surveyors, and that means that I understand buildings, I understand construction, and I understand cost and value. But that's only part of the picture. And I hope today, through all the speeches today, I was fascinated just to the little snippets I could learn this morning around how technology is responding to the demands of society. What other aspects can we think about? Because let's just take things a little closer to home. You know, Leonardo Da Vinci is one of the world's most famous people, I would suggest. I learned this trip, he spent 17 years living in this city, creating lots of things. And I was also struck by Maria's comment about how her operation, her enterprise, is taking things from an Italian perspective rather than an American perspective. And you would be very familiar with this sketch where Leonardo started to look at how do you make connections that you wouldn't ordinarily see because we have tunnel vision. And that's what I want to take you through in a minute. My early days at Disney, I learned a lot about perspective because I was told we do things as an American company around the world. I had to put in 1,800 by 1,800 L-shaped desks in a very expensive building in London, which I thought was crazy. But more interestingly, I was told that we're going to have dinner at 6 p.m. every day when we travel around Europe. I said, not sure that's going to work. So we turned up in Brussels. The restaurant wasn't open. And I said, by the way, when we go further south to Milan or Madrid, forget it at 6 o'clock, maybe 9-ish if you're lucky. And that's what it is, because they had a perspective on life that they dine at 6 o'clock. But let me just take you through very quickly a couple of other things. Who do you see here? An old lady or an elegant woman? What do you see here? Is this a duck? You sure? Some people might see a rabbit. It all depends how we look at things. And this, I suppose, comes back to not only the other side of the equation, is perceptions. And once again, this remarkable individual talking about this, and I realize I'm running out of time rapidly, but is perception reality? Let's just go back to this. Whoops. What's the first word that comes into your mind here, Maria? Who is it? Topolino. No, but Topolino. That's the first word I would say that most people would say here. Whereas, you know, my old company would say, this is Mickey Mouse and it's crazy. Why are these Italians doing this? But that's your belief, because that's based upon your perspective of this one, and that's fine. Surely a lot of people have seen this in training sessions. It glass half full, it glass half empty. Are you an optimist or pessimist? How do you look at life? But also there's a really important thing, only you have to look at it in perceptions. You recognize this guy, the heir to the throne in Britain? Surely not. Maybe we should look at it from a different position. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the crux of what I want to share with you over the next couple of minutes, because we've talked about this in the world of real estate, about people and place and technology coming together. Why is this happening? Why is it need to happening? I'd be interested to learn this morning is what's the Italian perspective on this? Is convergence happening here? Real estate is notoriously introspective because we make a lot of money. We don't care about our customers because we call them tenants. Could that be changing? Does the real estate industry need help from the outside world? Because everybody, whether you're a leader or not, needs to look at life in a whole raft of ways. Not only just looking at reports. You have to look out, look across. Look at Monte Rosa there. You couldn't see it 20 minutes ago. Different things. I'd encourage you all to really start looking at things differently. Because if you don't recognize some of these topics, which I don't have time to go into, you ought to. Because these are the really important things if you're involved in the built environment. So what's all this about? Very, very quickly, I see our world, if you're a real estate developer, investor, whatever, the game is fundamentally changing. And it's not just about WeWork, whether they survive or not. They're just the best marketing. There's a whole raft of other people. Disruption has hit real estate. It's hit technology years ago. People, society are changing because one important thing is happening, even here in Italy, I'm sure. It's how people can work. That means we're going to see a shifting dynamic from tenants to consumer. We're going to see a focus on changing from buildings to people. We're going to look at from cost to business value, not just rents of euro per square meter. It's total OPEX cost, it's total productivity. How do we deal with all of this? I think, and ladies and gentlemen, we need to take a leaf out of Leonardo's book. We need to consider a renaissance of the workplace, and where better to start that and to have great input from Italian voices, Italian perspectives, Italian opinions. We need to build bridges of understanding. But we need to build bridges of understanding not only between people and property, but a whole raft of things. And this is the entire spectrum, particularly this top one, between customer and landlord. And there's a whole raft of things which I'm very happy to explain or go on at a further session. My time is up. I would leave you with one thought. For those of us who are providers of buildings, the built environment, we are but mere guardians and stewards of such. We have a duty. We owe it to our children and our grandchildren that follow us to leave a sustainable legacy. And we need to do that now. Grazie.